can to win, I don't mean to offend. The greatest on the mic, mightiest with the pen. Losing never been a choice, but a line is the same. Ascending, word bending, birds birthed in the gym. Akin to the best, never aiming for less. Opposition so foul, got me calling for rest. Who's next to get bested? Mind, soul, and flesh is antithesis of mess. It's the precious of green. Hold on, you better catch a God throwing blessings. Dreams manifest, did you get what I mean? God always had a plan, he created for me.
Good day. I was gonna say good morning, but I wasn't sure if it was morning,
Yeah.
evening, depending where you're watching it, it's all relative, right? But I think
Yep.
good day is close enough. How you doing, Shell?
Hey, I'm doing well this morning. I am excited about this topic. So excited.
Well, here's the topic we're going to talk about today. Lacking nothing means practicing self-care. And it's funny, I know we're going to do the recap, but I tell you, this topic is really, I guess, what we're supposed to talk about today, because I got a text from a friend of mine who's a parent, and they were just happened to be expressing some parental struggles and frustration with their
Mm,
kids, and the way things are. And self-care, I think this episode, some of the topics we're going to talk about, in fact, even several of the topics we talked about the last few episodes, really help people like them, like ourselves, who are struggling with things in their past, making decisions, setting boundaries, whether it be with their kids or not. But I think this is going
mhm,
to happen, going to help a lot of us. If you are struggling with just life itself, practicing self-care is amazing. It's a necessary, it's an essential for those who go back to the COVID times, being locked in, held down, sheltered days.
mhm,
And I know for me, Shell, I was one of the persons, the people that believe that, I was missing something, lacking something, because of something that was missing in my life that I thought at the time I had to achieve, hadn't done, wanted to do, didn't
mhm,
do, chose not to do, left it laying around. But there's nothing lacking, nothing missing in our lives. The Lord allows everything to happen just when it needs to be. And practicing
mhm.
self-care is something that's going to help us get that realization. But before we get too much into that, take us back to what we talked about last week.
Yeah, I think it's actually a perfect segue. Is that, when we're practicing self-care, that means that there's a part of us that we're accommodating and that we are appreciating, right? And that's what we were talking about before, is keeping the peace and not doing those things, or not feeling like we can do those things for the sake of over accommodating or trying to meet other people's needs, other people's wants, and we're putting ourselves to the back burner. So today we're talking about how to put ourselves back to that front burner, and find the balance of when it's appropriate for us to accommodate or to compromise or what have you, without
Yeah.
dumbing down or dimming our light or dumbing down our values, or missing out on the things that are really important to us. So the self-care piece is getting back to those things that make us feel whole, make us feel complete. And and it becomes a daily practice. It's like, some of us may go get I love to get my nails done, and I love to get pedicures and his face waxed and all that kind of stuff, because it's important to me, that I feel good about myself. Those are outward things, right? But the inward things that I do, are like creating affirmations, and really getting into a pace of meditation, and daily prayer and gratitude. Okay. So, yeah, there's some things that we need to be doing internally and externally that really help us to realize who we are. And part of that too is following our dream, and not allowing other people to damper or step on what we believe we should be doing. Because when we're focused on what we're supposed to be doing, then there's so much life in that. And so that's how we came up with this particular topic of getting back to following our dream, getting back to doing us.
Yeah, and I think it's a great statement that you made, and I love the topic, because if anyone's out there
Mhm.
who's like me, I was a people pleaser for so long, and uh, the odd thing is I've flipped to the other side, and I'm not saying, hey, I don't give a rip about anybody, but I got to really care about me first, right? Well, I should say that we got to care about God first and what He wants, but then the next in the totem pole, and then the order, the hierarchy of things
Mhm.
is we have to care about ourselves. We have got to want to do more. We got to be able to want to look presentable, shower, brush your teeth, eat right, begin to get into some form of healthier
Mhm.
lifestyle, versus allowing ourselves to just fall into that pit of, I don't know, a pit of self-pity. Who knows what you want to call it or why you want to call it that, but We could call it a variety of things, but some folks just call it real. Call it, I don't give a damn about how I look or how I feel because I've allowed
Mhm.
someone else to say things about what I should or shouldn't do, allow them to provide some feedback and giving them that space in our minds and in our life to make decisions about us that we've come to agree with. And I don't want to agree with that negative anymore about what I'm not.
Mhm.
I couldn't, I refuse to do that anymore, but I did it for years, Shell, and it's not a good place to
Mhm.
be.
I think part of it is too. We talked off camera about sometimes like gender roles
Yeah.
and boxes that we put people in, or when we're in relationship with someone, whether it's an intimate friendship, whatever level of relationship. I know we typically go down the list because a lot of
Mhm.
times we're talking about our love relationships and the compromises or things that we do for our family or for our spouse or for someone that we really care about. um, but we allow sometimes the role that we think we're supposed to play as a mother, as a father, as a sister, as a brother, to dictate the things that we do, the behaviors that we carry out. And sometimes there's no conversation around, hey, in my house, Big Daddy, he washes clothes, he washes dishes. I mean, he's does a lot of things around the house that would typically be viewed as my role as the wife. And
Mhm.
so in some ways, um, at a time I was the only one working outside of the home. He was retired. And so that might look more like a male specific role where I'm taking care of the bills and I'm doing the budget and I'm doing that. And really what I'm saying is there's no um our specificity in our roles is based on our conversation and what works for our home. A lot of times I've heard men, when my husband really embraced retirement, not just being a Navy SEAL, but when he came off of his government job as well, it was like there was a sense of disconnect that he wasn't providing for us because he wasn't working and I was the only one working. So it was like, no, you're following where you're supposed to be, and you're allowing me, giving me space now to follow my dream. So that becomes a conversation, not about roles, but about how we want to be and how we want to live. And I know sometimes men in particular make sacrifices for their family. Well, I love music, but I can't do music because music doesn't pay the bills. So let me go out and get this corporate 9 to 5 job, and now I'm sad, I'm kicking the cat, slapping the dog because I'm not doing the things that really fulfill me as a person and give me that drive and give me that push and that motivation to follow my dream and figure out the financial piece, but
Yeah.
really doing what we love to do and bringing that to our families.
I think that there's so much that you said there, but we've made those decisions for ourselves. You said a key point too, that we chose to put our dreams on hold. We chose to put some things
Mhm.
that make us feel fulfilled away and down for the sake of for something else or for someone
Mhm.
else. And at the time, it probably seemed like the right thing to do. I did that. I know we were sharing before when we were planning for the session. I talked about how I used to own a studio as a part of a recording company, and I
Mhm.
chose to not work in that environment. I chose to not do that, and making that choice, I knew it hurt at the time. I knew it was a problem at the time. And sometimes we think, oh, I'll make a short-term
Yeah.
decision for the long-term goal. And was the goal achieved? Yeah, it
Mhm.
was achieved. But sometimes the goals that we have in our lives are achieved at the cost of the dreams that we had or a purpose that were actually set in
Mhm.
our life. Because with there being a difference between our goal versus the purpose, and we can't set purpose in our life. God sets purpose in our lives. And so if if we set a goal for ourselves that we find to be contrary to that purpose for our lives, we're going to be stuck. There's always going to be that wrestling and that rubbing against
Mhm.
what we feel that we should do. And for a lot of men, we don't always get back to that purpose until later in life, maybe after things are handled, maybe after things are let go, maybe after relationships that we once had have all
Mhm.
fallen apart. And it looks to us or to others like it's a midlife crisis. I wish that
Mhm.
I had had my crisis when I was 25, 30, when I
Mhm.
chose to go through and make, like you mentioned, fiscal or financial choices that made better sense that would allow me to
Mm-hmm.
live within that means to do my goal and my dream.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that the purpose is determined by God. It's determined by I call it the call,
Yeah.
and it's that thing that is inside of you that you feel compelled to do, and no matter what you're doing outside of that, whether, like you said, for fiscal reasons or for this is a temporary fix or what have you, it doesn't go away. And
Mm-mm.
oftentimes when I would talk with my dad, and he would say, Sunshine, find the thing that you would do that if you didn't get paid for it, you would still do it because you would feel fulfilled. You would feel that part of you. He said, do that, and the money will come. Do
Yeah.
that, your bills will be taken care of because
Yeah.
you're answering to a higher calling of
Yeah.
something that is so deep within you that you can't deny it, you can't ignore it. And this is something that I shared with you, that was divinely inspired. As you have to focus on the deepest parts of who you are to know yourself without compromise to following your dream. And sometimes that's hard because people don't always let me make this a definite statement. People never see your dream the way that you see it. They
Right.
never can. They
Right.
they never honestly will. It's not that they won't support you. It's
Yeah.
not that they won't see a portion of, oh, that's what you're talking about. But your
Yeah.
dream is about you.
Yeah.
You're carrying out your call is about you. And you have to be crystal clear on what that is. To know even when you fulfill that thing or when you are making steps toward that, because you're connected to that in the deepest parts of what you hear or what you're doing. And it may look like utter chaos to other people. I imagine, Craig, when you're doing shirts or designs and you're very open and you're very transparent about, hey, what do you guys think about this? Or would you wear this as a man? Or would you rock this as a queen?
Mhm.
What do you think about this? And you're open to that feedback.
Mhm.
And when you're in your lab and you're doing what you're doing, there's probably paints and stencils and you know materials everywhere and it looks like utter chaos, but to you it's crystal clear that no, I have to do. You were talking about your heat press the other day, and like, well, I gotta dry these this way, and I gotta wet these this, and if
Yeah.
I do that with too much heat over here, then I make the shirt, and I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
But what I see is the beautiful end result of you following your dream, of you being creative. You also recently did a song,
Yeah.
and you shared that, and so yeah. So what does that process look like to you? And I kind of want to. I'm kind of leading the witness just a little bit because sometimes we're disappointed
Yeah.
that people don't get it,
Yeah.
and at the end of the day, it's really not for them to get. But what are some of the dreams that you've put on the back burner that you're reignited, and how do you deal with that disappointment?
Well, on this show we do a lot of song lyrics and things like that. So what comes to mind real quick is reunited. We're reunited and it feels so
Yeah.
good. But music was one of the things because I'm a classically trained pianist. And I was since I was 5 years
Mm.
old.
Mhm.
There was a part of my life in some cases that feels like it was a million years ago or another lifetime ago. And in some cases it was because there's different places in my life that we've been and it changed. And in that change, I've allowed certain parts of my life, certain aspects, certain activities, certain desires to be separated and compartmentalized
Mm.
within a certain amount of
Mhm.
time or a certain era. So it feels like it's not there. So getting
Mhm.
back to music, back to life, back to reality, I think it's
Back
wonderful.
to life.
Yeah, yeah, you feel me? And I think it's the best thing. And when we're not authentic to ourselves for what we were
Yeah.
designed for, it's gonna make us feel off, fall
Mhm.
just out of sorts. They're gonna almost feel like if you knew you had an arm when you were a child and you
Mhm.
didn't have the arm anymore and you lived without the arm for 50 years, then all of a sudden somebody
Mhm.
came back to you and said, "Hey, we could put that arm back on and it'll work just as good as it did as when you first had it 50 years ago or however many years ago."
Mhm.
And you put it back on, it's like, I may not even know what to do with this because I've accepted the fact of having
Yeah.
been without this arm for so long. In some cases, some of us wouldn't even it'll take some time to get used to. Some of us may
Mhm.
not even use it because, forget it, I don't need it. But when you
Mm-hmm.
start to really use that thing and realize that I can actually now hold on to more life, I can actually reach for more things and really hold things more stable, Shell, I think it's the best thing in the world to realize that now I'm whole again and I can do
Yeah.
everything that I was designed to do. So, yeah, music is beautiful and I don't want to ever let it go. And I can't be mad for those who do make those choices for the
Mm-hmm.
sake of others, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
You can never resent those that you made the choice for because it wasn't
Because you
their
made the
choice,
choice.
it was
You made the
our
choice.
choice.
Yeah. I love what you're saying. There's some beauty in the so part of it, my brain is like part of dealing with the disappointment is actually jumping back in and
Yeah,
realizing that what you just said, it was my choice to do that.
yeah,
No one forced me to do it. While my family may have appreciated it, they probably saw some things in you,
yeah,
a gap. They probably noticed like Dad's not as happy, or Craig's not as happy these days. I wonder what's missing, right?
yeah,
And so now that you're um, back in it, there's probably a difference they're going to see in the most positive way as well. The
yeah,
other thing that I thought about as you were talking about the limb and getting it returned is sometimes things are taken away from us, or we're born without them, or we lose them after we've had them
mhm,
because there's a different way to do what we thought we could only do
yeah,
with that piece.
yeah,
And that is taken away from us. And at the time, it might seem like, dang, this is unfair. Why is this taken away from me?
yeah,
But I go back to my theory that everything we need is already inside of us. So while I want my limbs, absolutely, I'm used to having them. But
yeah,
if you ever have seen a person like a military, like a veteran, or someone who has lost a limb due to some tragedy, and then that story becomes a part of their triumph, that they're able to continue on living their dream with
mhm,
what we might seem without everything that they need.
mhm,
But it was never about the limb that they lost. It was
yeah,
about their attitude. It was about their motivation. It was always about the dream that they were able to fulfill and continue to do. And so I think that that's an important distinction, that when we get to that place of disappointment, or we get to see like, oh, why isn't this happening for me? That really, it's not too late.
mm,
That's probably the time where you need to tap into something that is deeper than just
yeah,
the surface thing that we thought was going to be there. And whether that losing a limb is a friend, a relationship, a loss of a loved one, a loss of a dream in that moment, if it's meant to be, it's going to happen. And it's never too late to reignite that. It's never
right,
too late to start that, because this denial or this delay doesn't mean denial of the dream that we have. It's simply a delay for us to actually get clearer about the path that we're on, if we take that opportunity. It's when we get stuck in that spiral of woe is me, or I'll never get back to it, or the feelings of forgiveness that we can't forgive ourselves, or we're
yeah,
blaming those people that we made the choice for, instead of
mhm,
accepting where we are,
yeah.
and that it was actually in our control the whole time. That there's just, we can get out of that faster when we realize there's another
Yeah.
way.
Regret is a monster. It is a monster
Mm.
that has probably got about 6 or 7 heads and, foaming at the mouth, sharp teeth and claws, and it's I'm not gonna say there's a part of me that the defeated, victimized side of me wants to say it's stronger than me, but that's not true because my faith, dictates and believes that I can do all things through Christ that gives me strength. So there's
Mhm.
nothing out there that's can happen that can beat me but me. And so if I choose to allow myself to feel the regret, if I choose to make someone else out to be, my how you said my adversary to the point where my losses and my ails is because of someone else, not
Right.
because it just happened or I didn't do enough. And sometimes we did enough and we just didn't win, but the key though is that we can't stop trying. And
Yeah.
if we start to continuously perpetuate that lifestyle of giving up, it becomes easier to give up the more often that we do it over time. And I don't
Mm.
want that anymore. I don't want that for my kids. I want to teach them, and I believe I believe that in my house, we have a real stark example of what it looks
Mhm.
like to have an L and have suffered a loss that we
Mhm.
always can use to as our marker to overcome. If we can
Yeah.
live through the loss and the loss of their mother
Yes.
and progress on, then we can do anything,
Mhm.
including flying. We haven't figured that part out yet, but if we
Mhm.
worked on, if we wanted to do that, we could figure that out as well. Because,
Wait a minute. Go back. Flying? What's that? What's that about?
well, I mean, you can fly. I'm not saying, well, you can even fly like a bird if you have the right tools, the right apparatus. You have those guys that have those suits that let you glide from, you know, uh,
Um,
you know what I'm
I
saying?
thought you meant you guys were I thought you meant there was some fear of actual flying, not the
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because when I was first getting married years ago, I
Mhm.
developed a real fear of flying, so much so that I would have, I would become sick, I'd become anxious, and I would fly like I was sitting in a roller coaster. I would grip the
Mm.
seat because I was afraid. And that was back in, I think, 2001, 2002. And I remember calling my dad one time. I'd had an extremely rough set of flights. And I used to
Mhm.
work for a large company that caused me to need to have to travel to support their,
Mhm.
their IT efforts around the world. And called and said, "Dad, we just landed. The plane ride was horrible, and I just can't do this anymore. I'm afraid, and I don't understand what's going on. I haven't always been
Mhm.
that way. I'd been in some rough flights prior to that, and I didn't feel the same. It was just, oh, roller coaster bump. Oh well, if I die, I die.
Mhm.
And I used to always say, and it's funny you bring this up because I hadn't thought about that until right now. But whenever
Mhm.
we would have the bumpy flights before I got married, before I was in a committed relationship, before I had
Mhm.
kids, I would always say, okay, God, well, into your hands I commit my life and let's go. If I die on this plane, then I'm going to be with you. I
Mhm.
was comfortable and I could roll with it.
Mhm.
Shortly after I got married, it was like, oh gosh, oh my goodness, oh. I told my dad that. He was like, you're afraid of losing something now. And losing something
Responsibility.
that,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
that's something that matters. And the reality is, even if I die right now, I'm going to the same place. It's not going to make a difference whether I'm white knuckling my ride or rolling with it. And I try to remind
Yeah.
my sons of the same thing. Even if, because there's a concern that, I die or something happened to me. And I've talked to a few of them even up until a few months ago. And it's been 10 years without their mom. They still have
Right.
that thought or fear or so in the back of their mind that what if something happens to my dad, what happens to me, especially with those
Right.
under the age of 18. And I'm
Mhm.
just reminding them that it doesn't matter what happens to me because all things work together for those who love God and are called according to his
Mhm.
purposes. So whatever happens to me or
Mhm.
whatever happens to you, it's going to be what it's supposed to be. And you're going to be all right because God's got your handle. So if we were starting to
Mhm.
remember those kind of things,
Mhm.
it at least will begin us to getting our mindset right and dealing with our fears.
Yeah. So this is like completely on target yet off script, right? And so
Mhm.
that's an X. And you were, I think, a part of the fear, not only of losing and now understanding the magnitude of responsibility that you had or had and have once you were committed,
Yeah.
once the ring went on, the kids were born, and all of that. Um, then I want to connect this back to what you were doing for the sake of the family versus what you wanted to do for the sake of you and a healthy life with your family, right?
Mhm.
So the fear was not only of losing them, but the fear was also, I think, associated with doing something that you know you didn't really want to be doing,
Yeah.
and that
Yeah.
be the reason why you suffered the loss,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
Because like if we suffer the loss and we know like our dads our parents rather
Mhm.
when they passed away they were sold out. I'm going to heaven. This is why I've been living the life that I've been living. And so
Right.
there was no fear because they were following in their purpose. right? The fear was reduced. I'm not saying people are on their deathbed don't have a moment of fear. Even Christ was like, Lord, if there's any other way, could you please make that happen? Because I'm nervous about this. I'm gonna do it because it's my purpose, but I'm nervous about it. And so when you can end or begin your life knowing that you've lived out your purpose, I think that that helps to reduce the anxiety around dying and not fulfilling your purpose.
I want to jump in there real quick because just yesterday, I really felt like I think I had to write it down. Bear with me one second. Let me pull it up because it's
Hmm.
really key here because I really felt like I had it. Where is it at? Right.
And death in this case is physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, whatever the death is that is associated. So I wanted to clarify that while you're doing that.
Right. And it says I felt like I would be doing myself a disservice if I were to
Hmm.
give up or quit right now. I don't have
Yeah.
to worry about leaving a legacy. I've already done that. And it's not
Boom.
the size of the legacy I leave,
Hmm.
it's the fact that I leave one. So
Yes.
often we get caught up with what are we leaving our family financially? And I'm not saying we don't practice good
Yes.
fiscal financial responsibility with leaving our family a
Responsibility.
financial
Absolutely.
legacy. I'm not saying against that. So those who do
Yeah.
that, big ups and keep doing it. But what I am saying
Yes.
is sometimes we get so caught up in what did I leave? What do I leave? What do I leave? And did I get something from my father? Did I get something from my mother? And we're boiled down to a dollar and cent and the numbers to the left of the decimal and versus
Hmm.
we live our lives like we are from the right of the decimal, so much
Yes.
less than what we're valued at. And we talked about that on previous episodes that we put so
Yes.
much more worth on the dollars and cents of our life
Yes.
versus the actual living out of our life to the fullest and what we can do for
Yes.
society in a non-financial way. And I don't want to live that way anymore. And that gave me so much more freedom yesterday to get in, to
Yes.
continue to do what I'm doing to build my business or businesses, to prep and
Yes.
build this. This show is what we're doing here to live and grow and love again and get involved in life because I no longer had to live with a singular motive.
Yes.
Getting up in the morning used to be my singular motive, not
Hmm.
living and getting up,
Right.
just being awake and alive as it gets make it more focused. That used to be the only goal for the last probably 9.5 to 10 years. Being alive was my goal.
Yes.
And that
Yes.
took from my purpose because I didn't do anything while I was alive, not anything, didn't do much consciously while I was alive to work towards that purpose, let alone figure out what it was.
Uh, Spot on. And so we were having a conversation with our youngest son Lawrence, a 19-year-old, and he was like, "Mom," he was asking me these series of questions. I think he saw a video or something. He's like, what are like the words that you would leave with me? He says, "I'm not saying you're gonna die, and I'm not saying I want you to die, and I'm not saying something's wrong with me either." He's just like, what is something that you want me to live by, or that you would want me to share as a part of who you were? And Craigie, you helped me with a safe place. And you mentioned that that piece feels very much like what would translate as legacy from
Mhm.
my voice around what I believed and what I stood. And that always resonates with me. And what I shared with him was something that it's on my website, that there is not just that when we transform our lives, and we've had all of these devastating, traumatic moments that define us and that shape our lived experiences and all of that, that I am a firm believer that there is not just life, meaning you can be alive and not be living, but there is actually living after that moment of devastation when you can do what you just said.
Yeah.
Recognize that your goal has changed. Your mindset has to change. The Bible talks about renewing of your mind. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. That literally means think to do and to be different.
Yeah.
You can't do the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over and over. expecting a different result. We can no longer do that. Your mission, now that you have your purpose, your vision, you can have multiple missions. So let's be clear about that as well. You can have multiple missions, but those missions should align to the greater purpose. You can have multiple visions. Your vision can change the trajectory of your mission, but it should be with the end in mind with the purpose. That's why people do rebranding. It doesn't mean that their call has changed. It means that they've acknowledged or exposed another part of what is it that I'm supposed to be doing. I lost this limb and now I have to work without this limb, but now I'm focused on something that is really, really, really still equally important. I'm just doing it in a different way because my goal and my purpose for why I'm doing what I'm doing, I'm realizing that, not just thinking about it, but I'm acting upon what I'm thinking, and those things that I'm thinking about have been changed because of my experience. So this is really, thank you for sharing your personal journal.
Well, I appreciate it. And I think with our topic of self-care, and let me put it back on here because I think it's important to restate it for those who may have joined later, is that in life, we're lacking nothing means practicing self-care. And while you were talking, I really began to realize and feel that the divide between generations, especially the baby boomers and beyond, and now, our generation and the Gen Zs and the millennials, is largely because of resentment, because we've chosen so often, those before us have chosen so often to, for one, not figure out what their purposes were or are. And then when they figured it out later in life, probably after the kids are damn near grown and almost out the house, that a lot of those resent the children because of the things they were not able to have accomplished because their children were there. And our kids didn't ask to come here. It wasn't like they all of a sudden were jumped up in our bodies and the women became pregnant miraculously. Happened one time that I know of. As an immaculate conception. And those who were sports and football fans, there was the immaculate reception, totally different thing. But it's not our kids' fault that they're here. It was our fault.
No.
We chose to make some decisions to get down with the get down, and then they're here. So you
The
can't
cost
blame
to play the game.
the cost of playing the game. So we have to also realize that once we figure out what we want to do, that there's steps that we have to take. Every moment that we're alive, that we're awake, we've got to live into something that takes us closer to that purpose. And it doesn't matter if you started when you're 100 and you live to be 105, or if you started when you're 40, 50, or 60 and you live however long that you are living. Part of the self-care is figuring out what your purpose is and taking every possible step, whether it be a small step or a large step, as long as it's a step towards the goal and not away from it.
Right. And I love how the conversation morphed from nails, outside stuff that we do, pedicures, haircuts, what we dress, what we wear as a part of that self-care journey. It is equally important. I'm a firm believer that how we feel on the inside shows up on the outside. And that even goes for our homes. I remember one time I felt confident that my husband was suffering. He has PTSD. It really appeared that he was in the depths of depression, anxiety, social anxiety, and all of the diagnosis that he has. But I was seeing it happen. And it wasn't so much about his attitude towards me, meaning the words that he was saying. I noticed that his nightstand, which is typically immaculate, it wasn't even organized chaos. It was just chaos. It was like, what happened? Like, what did you undo that you didn't have time to redo? I noticed that, like I said earlier, gender roles. He washes the clothes. Well, the clothes are piling up, and I'm like, okay, you haven't washed clothes in 2 weeks. But he didn't want me to help him. That was the other thing. I was like, the clothes are piled up, honey. I can, I have some time. I can throw some stuff in. No. So he didn't want to help because he wasn't ready to admit where he was. And just other things that were happening. I noticed he's usually well groomed, even though he has a Viking beard, as I call it. He's always well groomed, and I noticed he wasn't. He was only shaving on Sundays,
Mm.
to go to present, you know, whatever. And I stopped him and I said, "Listen, I'm concerned. You haven't said anything. You're still moving on. I still feel your love. I still feel your presence. But there are some behaviors that you usually do when I know you are in your mode, in your purpose, walking in that this chaos around you is a representation of what's going on inside of you. Same with our youngest son. Room is a freaking mess, and I'm like, what's going on in here and in here that you're willing to live in this filth? That you're willing to, and I called it filth, but you're willing to live in this disarray that doesn't represent who I know you to be. Not practicing self care, not allowing the things that are inside of us to overtake us, and then they start spewing out because we're not addressing those things that keep us bound or that hinder our minds or that are on our heart. And so we start behaving, creating this moat, creating this, and it's totally subconscious. It's a protection mode. So the self care definitely has to start on the inside of us, realizing who we are, what we're called to be. And if you don't know what that is, reach out to us. Let's have a conversation about it, because I guarantee you, it's between something that you're really, really scared to do, but you can't take your mind off of it, and the difference between those two coming together or staying separate is how you're presenting right now, and it's also what you how you're limiting yourself. So we want to help to facilitate those types of conversations as well.
While you were talking, this topic came to my mind: walking wounded,
Hmm.
treatable through living. And what
Mm,
does living look like? It's like you mentioned, it's discovering what your purpose is, and having conversation with us. And Dr. Knight is a brilliant person, great person to talk to and help with that. Those of you who may find, oh, I've got a life coach, or I've got someone I want to, well, find the resources that you need. If you need
mhm,
help getting those resources, we're definitely here to help, because it's necessary, it's essential. Because if you don't find out your purpose and what you were placed here for, came here for, you're going to constantly be wandering around it. Children of Israel, in that case, in the Bible story, they walked around the same mountain, their destiny, right, for 40 years. And it's funny to
mhm,
how, in our modern society, a lot of men have a midlife crisis right around 40, because the time they
mhm,
get tired of walking, tired of being without it, tired of being sick and tired of not doing what they felt like they always wanted to do. And I get it. Some
mhm,
people say, "Oh, you want to live out your childhood again?" Well, it makes sense, because some of us truncate or give up our childhood for the sake of bad decisions. And I'm not
mm,
saying the people
mhm,
we may have been with were bad decisions, but in some cases, the people we chose to live our lives with at that time, the decisions we made with some people, were bad decisions. But it wasn't the other person's fault. I would imagine, at least from a man's standpoint, no one held a gun to your head to make sure that you slept with that person, or no one
mhm,
probably held a gun to your head while you took those drugs, or you drank that alcohol.
mhm,
There may have been some cases with the alcohol, maybe depending on the areas where you grew up. I get it. But there was
mhm,
always a means of escape. There was always an out you had. There was always a time where you could have slipped away. But once we started making those decisions to accept that lifestyle and not make any changes to make any of it better for the sake of ourselves and our children's children, that's when the despair, like you mentioned, really starts to lock in. That's when the regret starts to lock in. That's when the hopelessness begins to lock in, and you can potentially wind up entertaining thoughts of suicide. I've had the
mhm,
opportunity to basically sit shoulder to shoulder with two people, one just 2 weeks ago and one a few years ago, with people who looked like the picture of happiness. If I had to put,
mhm,
a face to a definition of hope and
mhm,
joy and love, those two
mhm,
people would have been candidates. One was a 40-plus-year-old man, business
mhm,
owner, married. beautiful wife, family, had what you would thought everybody wanted. The other
Mhm.
was a girl under the right about the age of 20. Not sure she was over or under, but she seemed like she was right about 20.
Mhm.
End of a football game. I met her for the first time. She had her boyfriend and family. It looked right on the outside.
Yeah.
But in both cases, and in with some of us, and even myself over time, there's
Yeah.
something wrong on the inside. That
Mhm.
young lady took her life at the end of that football game
Mm.
and was found by other family members the following morning. If you find that you don't have, if you're not taking care of yourself, you're going to find a way to take care of yourself. And that's something we should never find ourselves in that way to take our lives prematurely. We all have hope, and there's nothing in our lives that is that devastating or that monumental that we should take our own life or even attempt it. There's help for you.
Absolutely. Lots of hotlines, lots of different resources and support. And it's a tough thing because we never know what that conversation is with that between that person and making that whatever decision that they're making, contemplating that. And so it's a really, really delicate area. My sister-in-law and my nephew both committed suicide.
Mm.
And in some cases, family members that do that, they're taking out other family members with them. And so um, again, we don't know what conversation, and neither Craig nor I are saying, oh, from a religious standpoint, you're going to hell because you did that. I don't believe
Right,
that at
right,
all. I don't
right.
believe that because I don't know what that conversation was, and I've been low enough to think, what if I just rolled off of this bridge? What if I did that? What if I just lost control? Because life has a way of beating us down. I know that
Yeah,
I didn't do that. I know that that wasn't for me to do, but there are
yeah,
people in my family who have shared, hey, I've had the barrel there, I've had the peels there, and one of my family members testifies that he tried to commit suicide every single day for an entire year,
yeah,
and we knew he was suffering in some way, based on what he had shared he had gone through, but none
sure.
of us knew the extent or the magnitude. So hearts go out, my heart goes out to those families who are dealing with that and definitely in the recent past. And I think what's really important is that as we're on this show and as we connect with other families, that we encourage people to have conversations about that as well, age
Sure.
appropriate. I have a 9-year old, and my youngest son, when he was her age, talked about, I don't want to be here. I don't have any friends. I feel bullied. All of these things. He didn't feel important. And so kids as young as 9 and 7 and 10 and teenagers are suffering in some way. And as parents, if we're not open to having the conversations around what's on their minds, that's a part of self-care too. Someone listening to you, someone trying to understand or empathize, even if it's not their lived experience. Sometimes just being heard and saying, "Son, I've never gone through that, but let me connect you to Uncle such and such that you
Yeah,
can trust and have this conversation." So building your community, building your tribe, building a system of people that
sure.
your kids are safe with as well. If it's not a lived experience that we've had, I think is really important as we talk about family bonding and bridging and not glorifying in these things,
No,
actually helping one another get through this because sometimes it can be generational. And matter of fact, I'm going to say it's always generational because our family lines are always going to be attacked when we know what our purpose is, or somebody prayed for you, or somebody had a vision for you, your grandfather, your grandmother, your parents, what have you. There's always going to be an attack to keep you from getting to that place where you're supposed to be. And those feelings of defeatism, those feelings of anxiety, and all of those things, depression, there's help. And there is
yeah,
absolutely help.
right. And you can live and you can survive. I'm a survivor. I have tried it unsuccessfully, And being a father, I've had those conversations that you mentioned with one of my sons who's
Mhm.
wanted to do it, wrote me a suicide note. And being able
Mhm.
to have those conversations, look him in the eye and say, hey, I get it. I understand where it came from. And you mentioned in our generation, our bloodline that exists. We've had to then deal with those things that are in our bloodline to have those conversations versus sweeping them under the rug or being too
Yeah.
ashamed to share our truth and admit to the fact that we aren't perfect, weren't perfect, didn't live a perfect life, and it's okay. And
Mhm.
even having this conversation, which was a topic we didn't even have planned in
Mm.
our,
Yeah.
pre-show meetings, it definitely
Mhm.
reminds us that, we make our plan, but God orders our steps, and there's a step for every one of us in our life that ends with us being here together or here with God
Yeah.
and not something that we step off a cliff or do whatever. It's not that is a part of a plan as well, but sometimes we interject on ourselves. But if you need help, I definitely encourage you to reach out to us for to talk to someone that you feel safe with. And if you don't think you have anyone to feel safe with, that's when we really realize that we do. We just need to change our perspective as to who it is and who it is. It may, in some cases, maybe somebody that we really don't know well yet,
Mhm.
or don't give a chance yet
Mhm.
to know.
Yeah.
I've
I was
lived
talking
that
with
life.
my
Oh, I'm
oh,
sorry.
go ahead.
No, no, no. Go ahead.
I was gonna say yesterday I was talking to a really good sister friend of mine and a part of my tribe, and I said sometimes we were talking about relationships and marriage and things like that, and I said sometimes you want to be like Cheers, you want to go where everybody knows your name.
Yeah.
Sometimes you want to go where no one knows your name, and depending on where you are and where you reached out and who has helped you, sometimes I think it's better to go where people know your name because they have a context and an understanding to how you might have come to this conclusion for that initial conversation. I
Yeah.
still think that getting the proper therapy or coaching or whatever you have, because as a coach, I'm not qualified to diagnose, but I can refer out if I think,
Sure.
based on my psychology background, based on my experience, based on my absolute education and training, that this is out of scope. Let me connect you with someone to a network or what have you. And one thing that
Sure.
I always tell my clients is check in with your primary care.
Yeah.
Check in with your primary care to see what's going on with you, and don't let the stigmas and the stereotypes or the things that, particularly in Black culture, Black family, and I'm learning when I say Black too, I mean ethnic cultures,
Yeah.
people who are homogenous in nature, people of color who family is the foundation of everything that we do, everything that we're taught. And there's so much that we don't learn. That's a whole nother thing about what we lose generation to generation based on culture. Um, don't be discouraged or confused that therapy is of the devil or taking
Mhm.
medication is of the devil if that's your religious background. God gives insight. God gives insight, and he's helping the doctors, he's helping the scientists and all of those things when they are believers. And so we can learn a lot from science, we can learn a lot from our pastors. I'm not discounting either. I want us to be really woke about the reality that if you don't get help somewhere, you will absolutely take a matter into your own hand that could have been fixed within one conversation.
Yeah. I love your thought there because and I should have put it at the bottom of the screen, if we don't get help somewhere, you'll end up nowhere. And
Mm,
nowhere is a real place, and it sucks, and it goes right along with the fact that regret's a monster. Because when you finally wake up in that moment, that low moment, either the moment just before you successfully take your life or unsuccessfully take your life, there's a regret there. It's been documented by people who survived suicide attempts or jumping off buildings or
mhm,
bridges. That the moment just after leaping is a moment with the survivor saying, "Man, I regretted it as soon as I left the safety of that rail, as soon as I left the safety of that platform or that ledge, as soon as I know I did whatever it was to launch and ignited that situation, instantly regretted it." And that's a place where we want to keep you from. We want to keep you from the ledge, keep you off the sidewalk, keep you closer to the house if necessary, closer to a place that loved you. Um, you said something too before that was great about when it goes to a place like Cheers. It's one of my favorite shows growing up.
Yeah.
Since you came in, it was like Norm or whoever was
Yeah,
coming in the door.
exactly. Always
You know,
Norm.
always Norm, right? There was a time when I didn't want anybody to know me because every time I saw someone that knew me, when we went through the trauma with Sandy, was everybody's face and eyes
Hmm.
reminded me of the loss and the pain. So I needed to
Hmm.
go to a place where nobody knew. So as I healed, I was able to then go back to, which is odd now. I find myself spending a lot more time in that city where we
Hmm.
lived as a family. And now it doesn't hurt going back. I can see people that I used to see. I can interact with people that I used to interact back then. I don't feel that. I don't have that. But you can only experience that when you work on yourself, when you get the help that you needed. And
Hmm.
help, like you mentioned, Shell, it looks differently to different people. But there's
Hmm.
definitely no
Hmm.
help in the bottom of an alcohol glass. There's definitely no help in the bottom of a pill bottle that you're taking to numb and self-medicate.
Hmm.
Helping, yes, like you mentioned, is wonderful, but self-medication, never the key.
Yeah. And self-diagnosing. I know a lot of clients will say, "Do you work with?" Okay, let me say it right. I had a client once that said she thought that she had cryology. And I said, "Well, what? I've never heard of that." And she said, "Well, I tend to cry when other people cry." And I said, "Sweetheart, that's called being human. That's how we're connected. That's called empathy. That might be compassion. That might be some what's the word, like resonation, between connection between, because we're wired to connect. Our brains are literally wired to connect. And so that's why we were in solitary or confinement, or that's boom, pandemic. We were all alone and isolated, even though we were with our families. Some people were absolutely alone with no conversation, no feedback, no connection, no touching other than ourselves. That is not how we're wired.
Right.
We're not wired to be alone. And so
Yeah.
that causes some psychological issues to occur. We are human. And what we're saying today is get back to doing you, get back to understanding or identifying or exploring, researching what your passion is, getting with yourself, meditating, asking yourself, what is it that I really want to do? What is my purpose? We have some tools that we'll be able to provide. I have a daily practices exercise that you'll be able to access. Creating literally a timeline and a calendar of what you do every single day, how that connects to your purpose, meaning the steps that you need to take to get you closer to that goal, or that, not the end game, but the outcome that you've been waiting for, because there's always going to be something after that. If we're continually learning and growing, there's always going to be something for us to do to become more perfect in what we want to accomplish. Additionally, connecting that purpose to an affirmation, creating the affirmation that helps us to remove fear, doubt, concern, or anything else, and speaking those things. We talked about speaking life into your purpose, and doing the steps that is necessary to accomplish that. So really grateful for the turn of events in this conversation, and the seriousness that we want to reinforce about practicing self-care, getting to the place where you're lacking nothing because you're following your purpose.
Yeah. I don't know what I would do without this conversation we have. I don't even think of it as a show. I just look at it as an opportunity where
Mhm.
twice a week you and I get together and we have 2 hour long conversations. And for those of you out there, you may not think you have a person out there that you can talk to and spend time doing life with, but I encourage you to open yourself up and allow those conversations to happen, those relationships to grow. I've been in a couple places over the last decade where I've chosen to disconnect myself, separate
Mhm.
myself, be alone in a room full of people. I mean, people think, oh yeah, it's just a figurative thing, but no, I actually did it. And I've been successful
Mhm.
in that and mastered that. I've actually worked for churches and been alone in a room full of
Well,
people. And
mhm.
one of the things people used to always ask me is, "Hey, how are you doing?" And based on our last 10 years of living, I thought it was
Yeah.
kind of a stupid question, but it's not. I mean, for those who
Mhm.
don't know you, it's a common, what do you call it? Hello, right? Or
Yeah.
conversation,
Reading.
greeting.
Yeah. Yeah. Mhm.
And I used to try to circumvent a person from asking. I would jump right in and say, "Hey, what are you up to? You staying out of trouble?" And usually the person
Mhm.
is waiting for you to ask, "How are they doing?" And by the
Right.
time their mind processes the fact that I changed the game in the question, they no longer cared about how I was doing because I automatically
Mm.
went to the fact that no one cares about how I'm doing anyway. But the
Mm.
truth is, I
Mhm.
realized I had to look at it right now from having this conversation. I didn't care how I was doing. And
Mhm.
once you realize the fact that you don't care, it's the place that you ought to care or get
Mm.
some care
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
that's when trouble really starts. All the
Mhm.
danger signs, Warning Room Robinson, those you should watch the old show.
Mhm.
It gets
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, you guys got the
Absolutely.
email down there at the bottom. So please hit us up on social. By the time this airs, our socials will be available for Knight and
Mhm.
Craig on all the social media outlets. Email us directly for comments, concerns, if you want to even be a guest, or if you need a resource at
Yeah.
knightandcraigshow@gmail.com.
Yeah. Thank you all for joining us today. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Akin to win, I don't mean to offend. The greatest on the mic, mighty is with the pen. Losing never been a choice, but a line is the same. Ascending, word bending birds, birthed in the gym. Akin to the best, never aiming for less. Opposition so foul, got me calling for rest. Who's next to get bested? Mind, soul, and flesh is antithesis of mess. It's the verse of supreme. Go long, you better catch a God throwing blessings. Dreams manifested, you get what I mean. God always had a plan, he created for me. Success only means that I did what he seen. Got the game and the fans locked in like a key. Sitting on the